The morning it happened, I was still half asleep when I heard the front door slam hard enough to rattle the frame. I knew that sound. It was the kind of slam that carries a verdict inside it. I was 23 years old, back home after my second attempt at a college degree had quietly collapsed under the weight of a creative writing major my father called a fancy way to waste money. I'd been sleeping on my childhood bed for 4 months, working a part-time shift at a print shop downtown, contributing $200 a month toward utilities because he'd insisted and I'd agreed, thinking it was a fair compromise. A bridge, not a destination. I hadn't known we were standing on opposite ends of that bridge, each of us waiting for the other to walk across. His name was Raymond, though everyone outside the house called him Ray. Inside the house, we mostly called him Sir or Dad, the choice depending on the weather of his mood. He was a man built by decades of concrete work, his hands rough as bark, his opinions poured and set the same way, no renegotiating after they hardened. He had grown up in a household where the oldest son inherited the family business or the family shame, and there wasn't much room between the two. What he found that morning was my notebook. Not a journal exactly, more a collection of half-finished short stories and character sketches, some poems I'd never intended anyone to read, and buried near the middle, a story I'd written about a father who slowly became a stranger to his own children. The father in the story was fictional. He was also, unmistakably, Raymond. I heard him reading. I didn't know he was reading at first. I thought he was just moving through the kitchen like he did on Saturday mornings, heavy-footed and deliberate. But then the house went unusually quiet, and that quiet was worse than the slamming. When I came downstairs, he was standing at the kitchen table with the notebook open in his hands and an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not anger exactly. Something beneath anger, something older and rower than that. Hurt wearing anger like a coat. "Is this what you think of me?" he said. I looked at the notebook. I looked at him. I thought about saying the character wasn't him, which was both true and completely untrue, and I thought about apologizing, and I thought about explaining the way fiction works, how writers pull from everything around them, how writing about something isn't the same as condemning it. Instead, I said, "It's just a story, Dad." He set the notebook down on the table very carefully, which was somehow worse than if he'd thrown it. Then he walked upstairs. Then came the sounds I couldn't mistake, dresser drawers pulled open, my closet door cracking against the wall, the scrape of the old duffel bag I'd brought home being dragged across hardwood. By the time I got back upstairs, he was already carrying the first load down. There's a particular kind of humiliation in watching your belongings land on a front lawn. It's not the belongings themselves, the clothes, the books, the half-dead succulent I'd been nursing for a year, the folder of rejection letters from literary magazines that I'd kept for reasons I couldn't fully explain. It's the public geometry of it, the way the lawn becomes a stage, the way the neighborhood becomes an audience even if no one is watching. My mother stood in the doorway. Her name was Delors, and she had spent 31 years learning the difference between arguments she could interrupt and ones she couldn't. This was the second kind. She watched with her arms folded across her chest and her jaw set in that particular expression that meant "I love you, but I don't have the leverage to stop this right now." She handed me my phone charger when he went back for the second load, pressing it into my hand without a word, and that small gesture felt like the only life raft in the water. He didn't scream. That was the thing people always got wrong when I told this story later. They assumed there was screaming. There wasn't. He was quiet the whole time, which made it more architectural somehow, more like a decision than a reaction. When the last bag hit the grass, he stood on the front step and looked at me. "When you can write something worth being proud of," he said, "you know where the door is." Then he went inside. I stayed with my friend Marcus for the first 3 nights. Marcus lived in a studio apartment above a Vietnamese restaurant and had exactly one air mattress and the generous spirit to offer it without asking too many questions. On the second night, he sat with me on his fire escape and we split a 6-pack, and he said the thing that friends say when they're trying to help. "He'll come around." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I believed it, but I also wasn't sure I didn't. I moved to a short-term sublet on the 4th day, a room in a house shared by 3 grad students, $60 a week, bathroom down the hall, window overlooking a parking lot. I put my clothes in the closet and my books in a stack against the wall and the succulent on the windowsill, and tried to make the geometry of it feel like a beginning rather than an ending. I kept working at the print shop. I kept writing, though the notebook felt different now, heavier somehow, like it had absorbed some of what happened. I started a new story. I wasn't sure yet what it was about. I did not call my father. He did not call me. My mother called twice in the first week, both times in the evening, both times keeping her voice low in the way that meant he was nearby. She asked if I was eating. She asked about the weather like we lived in different cities. She said, "Your father, the way people say a word they're not sure they should say out loud. He's not wrong to be hurt," she said on the second call. "I know," I said, and I did. That was the complicated part. On the 10th day, I was on a break at the print shop, sitting on a concrete step in the alley behind the building, eating a sandwich and reading submissions for a small literary magazine I'd started volunteering for because it gave me something to belong to. My phone was face down on my knee. When I flipped it over to check the time, the notification count stopped me. 88 messages, not from one person, from many. The family group chat, a chaotic thread that included aunts and uncles and cousins and my grandmother on my mother's side, which usually produced maybe 2 or 3 messages a week about birthdays and forwarded Bible verses, had erupted. I scrolled up to find the beginning. My Aunt Cheryl had started it. She was my father's younger sister, the one who had always been the designated peace negotiator of the family, the one who showed up at every gathering with a dish big enough to feed twice the people and opinions sharp enough to cut the tension. She had apparently called my mother that morning, learned what happened, and then done what Aunt Cheryl did, opened the group chat and typed a message that was equal parts prayer and prosecution. Raymond threw that child's things on the lawn, she wrote. I need everyone to sit with that for a moment. What followed those 11 words was, there's no other way to describe it, a family reckoning conducted entirely through text message. My uncle Dennis, my father's older brother, who had himself been thrown out of their childhood home at 17 by my grandfather, responded first. Some things skip a generation and some things don't. Ray knows what I mean. My cousin Brianna, who was 26 and had recently finished a master's degree in sociology, wrote 3 paragraphs about intergenerational patterns of emotional expression in families shaped by labor and scarcity. They were good paragraphs. I read them twice. My grandmother Rose, 78 years old, who typed with one finger and refused to use autocorrect on principle, wrote simply, Raymond was always too proud for his own good. I said it when he was 9 and I'll say it now. There were defenses too, to be fair. My uncle Patrick, who had worked construction with my father for 15 years, said the notebook thing would have hurt any man. My cousin Jerome said something about respect, and the roof over your head that made several people respond with disagreement. The thread branched and doubled back on itself, people quoting each other, people tagging each other, my Aunt Vivian from Atlanta writing a long message about forgiveness that managed to indict everyone equally. I sat in that alley for 45 minutes reading. My sandwich went unfinished. The print shop's back door opened twice, and both times I held up one finger and whoever it was went back inside. What struck me, what I couldn't stop thinking about as I scrolled, was how much everyone knew. Not just about the incident, but about my father. About the specific texture of his pride and the history underneath it. My uncle Dennis knew because he'd grown up in the same house. My grandmother knew because she'd built that house around him. Even the cousins my age knew because they'd watched him at enough family gatherings to recognize the patterns. Everyone had a version of Raymond, and every version had the same flaw in it, and the same love built around the flaw. My father called me on the 11th day, not texted. Called. That was how I knew it was serious. Raymond did not text on principle, for reasons he'd never fully explained, but which I suspected had something to do with the same stubbornness that made him refuse to use GPS. I let it ring twice before I answered. Your grandmother called me, he said by way of opening. Okay, I said, and your Aunt Cheryl. I figured. There was a long pause. I could hear the television in the background, a baseball game, the low murmur of the crowd. I didn't read the whole thing, he said. The notebook, I stopped when I got to the part about the father. I know. He stopped, started again. Was all of it bad the way I come across? I thought about the story. The fictional father in it wasn't a villain. That had been the whole point. He was someone who loved his children in a language they couldn't always translate, who showed up in every way except the one that was needed. He was tragic, not monstrous. No, I said. He loves his kids, he just doesn't know how to say it without it coming out wrong. Another long pause. You got that from somewhere, he said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, I said. I did. I heard him breathe. The baseball crowd murmured in the background. Somewhere in his house my mother was probably sitting very still, listening to half of a conversation and reconstructing the rest. Your room's still your room, he said finally. I didn't change anything. Okay, I'm not saying everything is settled. I'm saying the door's open. I know where it is, I said, which was what he told me to say when I was ready. He heard it and knew it. Come Sunday, he said. Your mother's making that rice. Thought about those 88 messages many times in the years since. There's something I find both painful and beautiful about what they represent, this idea that a family is not just the people under one roof, but a whole architecture of memory and pattern and love that extends outward through decades and branches. My father thought he was having a private argument with his son. Instead, he'd handed a stone to a still pond, and every ring that rippled outward had a name attached to it. Dennis, who understood. Rose, who'd seen it before. Cheryl, who refused to let it sit. Brianna, who could name the shape of it. Patrick, who defended him. Jerome, who tried and partially failed. 88 messages that said, collectively, we are paying attention. We remember, you don't get to do this quietly. I went back on Sunday. My father was at the kitchen table when I came in. He didn't get up, but he looked at me in a way that I understood, in the language we'd always used, to mean I'm glad you're here. My mother appeared from somewhere and put her hand briefly on my shoulder and then disappeared again, because she understood the moment required exactly enough presence and no more. I sat down across from him. We didn't talk about the notebook. We talked about baseball, about the print shop, about a guy he'd worked with who'd done something almost funny on a job site. At some point, the rice appeared, and then we were eating, and the television was on, and the kitchen smelled like it always had. Before I left that evening, I stopped in the doorway and turned back. Story, I said, the father in it. He figures it out eventually. In the ending, he looked at me. He nodded once slowly in the way that meant I heard you. I went home and opened the notebook. I wrote the ending. The succulent is still alive. I'm 31 now. My father read the story 2 years ago, the finished version, published in a small journal he'll never find on a newsstand. My mother found it online and printed it and left it on the kitchen table one morning without comment. He called me that evening about something unrelated, and at the very end of the call, just before hanging up, he said, "That piece you wrote, the ending was good." Raymond doesn't say much, but he says exactly enough.